Welcome to today's session where we are exploring a brand new resource from the State Library of Iowa, the Public Library Compensation Toolkit. This, as the slide says, will be an overview of the toolkit, and my name is Marianne Morey. I'm the Central District Consultant with the State Library of Iowa, and I am pleased to have with me Brenda Hall, actually my supervisor. She is the Library Program Director at the State Library, and Brenda was on the committee. She was probably the leader of that committee that oversaw the production of this, the publication of this Public Library Compensation Toolkit. So she'll be explaining more of that as we go along. I've also got in the room with me Amanda Grom, who is the Library Resources Technician from Northwest Iowa. She is our producer, and she will be taking attendance and keeping an eye on the chat for questions for us. So hopefully by now you've heard a little bit of the buzz that the State Library has this new resource, this new toolkit, which is freely available for you to use. The resource's full title is the Public Library Compensation Toolkit, a guide to fair and equitable pay. Today we're going to give you kind of the high-level overview of what all is available in this toolkit, and we will explain these basic aspects of the toolkit, why the State Library felt the need for such a resource, what the toolkit actually is and where it's located on our website. I'll give you that much as a hint. Who should use it and when should you opt to use it? And then how will you use it? And then finally, returning to another why question, why you will want to use it. So first
Mary
off,
Ann, I'm
yes,
going
go
to
ahead.
stop you for just a quick second. Everyone is seeing the presenter view of the slide deck at the moment. We've got some notes showing up in chat.
Okay,
Are you,
let me stop sharing. I had reversed that and it's showing on my screen the right way. Is it showing for you correctly now?
there we go.
Okay, well, that's opposite of what it usually is. So we'll continue from here. So let's start with why. First off, why did the State Library feel the need for this kind of toolkit? And Brenda, I'm going to hand this portion over to you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So, one of the things that we have noticed is that in any given calendar year, fiscal year, the district consultants can see anywhere from 10 to 20 new directors in their districts. So they're doing a lot of new director orientation. We have 6 different districts in Iowa, so that can be anywhere from 60 to 120 new directors in any given year. Sadly, one of the things that we've noticed as well is that there's repeated turnover in some areas, and that can be attributed in some instances to low director pay. Um, we also know that additionally, when a library board works with its city to increase the director's salary, there are often a lot of questions about where to start, how to develop a fair and equitable salary range. And the most often used resource is the Big Stats book, which is our annual publication of all the participating Iowa libraries' statistical data for the past fiscal year, which includes director salaries. While that seems like a logical place to start for salary comparisons, the sad fact is that because so many libraries are underpaying their directors, the comparisons often lead to the opposite effect, causing city councils to realize they're not the lowest paying city on the list, and therefore they might just reduce what they're offering as library director pay. When the majority of libraries in any given size code comparison are underpaying their library directors, the entire average is grossly misrepresented with a low figure. So comparing pay to such an average is not always a good comparison. And finally, the state library, the other reason why we do a 5-year plan for our federal dollars from IMLS. And we wrote into our plan, it's goal 1.4.2, develop a comparable worth plan to address pay inequity that contributes to staffing shortages and high turnover rates as a way of improving library operations in Iowa. Um, so in 2023, the state library hired Siegel Consulting, and Paula Singer was actually our consultant. And the state library years ago actually had a document that Paula had also helped work on. So this was kind of reviving that and bringing that back. So you can see in this training slide that Siegel Consulting presented to the state library that it allows for the sharing of background and context regarding compensation components and market data to help guide compensation decisions that are made by your library board. And our goal is for it to assist library boards and directors in better understanding the qualifications and the needs of the library and subsequently prepare better job descriptions. And it also helps compare what the library director's role is in comparison to other similar roles within the same local government or community. And finally, it also provides a resource not only for collecting compensation market data, but also tips for facilitating those important compensation conversations, or as some of our team like to say, crucial conversations.
Right. Thank you, Brenda. Let's move on now to the what. What exactly is this toolkit? And Brenda, since you were part of the team that developed it, I'm going to let you define this for us a little bit.
Sure. The toolkit is really intended to guide the trustees and the library director through the process of understanding their role, both in the hiring process and the role of the director, collecting data, facilitating conversations for fair and equitable pay. So, as you can see here, we've got kind of 4 steps. And the first is working on something called a Job Analysis Questionnaire, or a JAQ. We provide a template for that, but more on that in a moment. We talk about how to compare similar positions within local government, collect area compensation data, and use those findings to then have conversations about compensation. Don't let these 4 steps overwhelm you. While they might seem daunting, if you were doing the process on your own, the purpose of the toolkit is to explain and make that work easier. So, our goal is to provide explanations, templates, and examples to get you from that first step all the way to the end, the final of the process. So here we also have another slide that Siegel created for us about what's included in this toolkit. And here you can see the Job Analysis Questionnaire. That's a pretty substantial document, but great for really understanding the needs of the position and the type of work that's being done. A guide to creating and updating effective job descriptions, an overview of how to request compensation, and then it also has an appendix with helpful resources in it. So you can see on that slide what the toolkit is intended to do is provide library boards, directors, and staff the tools needed to request that competitive pay.
Okay, let's move on now to where you can find this wonderful resource. And hopefully you all have this particular site bookmarked on your computers. It's the State Library's website, which is available at statelibraryofiowa.gov. And that is where you will find this new toolkit. The easiest way to find it is to hover over the word libraries in the top menu bar. So if you hover over that, don't click on it, just hover. you'll get a pop-up menu, and you'll see in the far right column of that pop-up menu, which there's a column titled Toolkits and Guides, and about midway down, you will see Public Library Compensation Toolkit, and that's what you will want to click. Once you click on that, the link will open to this main page that houses not only the Public Library Compensation Toolkit, but also those templates that Brenda mentioned earlier for the Job Analysis Questionnaire, that JAQ. You will hear us talk about that a lot in today's presentation. A template for developing job descriptions, several other resources pertaining to hiring and or statistical data, as well as some recommended reading. Those are books that the State Library has available in our professional development collection. Those are books that you can access free via interlibrary loan. So the toolkit and the assorted templates are all available for you to download and use without charge. As far as our who question, who should use this toolkit, the natural response is going to be library boards and library directors. And we felt this would probably be an appropriate time to remind everybody that the Library Board of Trustees directly hires, evaluates, supervises, and if necessary, disciplines the library director and only the director. This is true in the overwhelming majority of our library ordinances here in Iowa. So look at your library ordinance and you will see exactly what your trustee's role is in regards to the process of hiring the director. The library director then is responsible for hiring, evaluating, supervising, and if necessary, disciplining other library staff. Now, in larger libraries, the director may have department head supervisors who also do some hiring, evaluating, etc. of employees in that particular department. So in those situations, this library compensation toolkit will be useful for those hiring supervisors. I would also say that this toolkit is something that you may find useful to share with your city, particularly if your city doesn't have an HR director. And while the toolkit is specifically designed with public library employees and trustees in mind, the process that we're describing here today can work equally well for a department head position anywhere else in the city. So, Brenda, I'm going to let you talk about when we might want to use this toolkit.
So I think one of the most obvious reasons is when you're planning to do some hiring. Remember that it is the majority of public library boards that hire the director in Iowa, and the director is then responsible for hiring other staff. The hiring time is an ideal time to review job descriptions and pay scales. So this is probably the time that it seems most obvious to use the toolkit. However, we hope that you'll use the toolkit to update your library job descriptions or create them if you don't currently have them. Having a job description is a tier 1 standard number 21 that says the library has written job descriptions that include education and experience requirements, and a written salary range for each position is recommended but not required. So, anytime you're considering pay raises for any library personnel, this toolkit will be a valuable resource for determining an appropriate pay scale. So, this makes it useful not only for considering pay raises, but also for incorporating those raises into your library's annual budget. And of course, this all ties into the library's board or the library board's role of advocating for the library by ensuring the library is well staffed with compensated, qualified employees.
Okay, that's kind of our introductory information. So let's move now into a look inside the toolkit. Again, we will only be doing an overview, but these next slides, I think, demonstrate how to use the toolkit. And we briefly looked at this slide earlier, but it really is a good overview of how the toolkit works. I think Brenda described earlier the 4 steps. So you're first going to complete that JAQ, Job Analysis Questionnaire. You'll then identify and review similar positions in your area. You will collect the compensation data from those other positions that you reviewed, and you will finally compile your findings into talking points. So these next slides will be taken predominantly from the Siegel Corporation slides that they demonstrated to the state library staff. So That's why they look a little different. So that first step is to complete the Job Analysis Questionnaire, JAQ. I'm kind of curious, how many of you are familiar with that term, Job Analysis Questionnaire? I'm guessing maybe not a lot of you. And don't let the lengthy title and yet another acronym in library land intimidate you. It's not as difficult as you think. And as Brenda said, we have a template for it. So a job analysis questionnaire is designed to gather important information regarding a position and the value it provides the library. And understanding the value of that position is actually the first step in determining or requesting fair compensation. So the questionnaire gathers data regarding a position's duties, responsibilities, essential functions, their required qualifications, the physical conditions of the job, all the kind of stuff you would find in a job description. So this job analysis questionnaire is going to kind of be a twofold resource for you, because it will definitely not only help you in requesting fair compensation, but also in developing the job description. So the questionnaire is intended to understand a job and its requirements, not the individual performance or specialized skills. The responses in the JAQ can be used to form a request for fair compensation or to develop a job description that documents the role, responsibilities, expectations of a position, as well as those KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities. Also realize that the job description can be used to update any of those positions' job descriptions, or as Brenda mentioned earlier, if you don't have job descriptions, this is a great resource to use to develop those job descriptions. Within the job description, you'll see there's a job summary, or part of the job analysis questionnaire, rather, there is a job summary, and that's where you will provide a brief summary of the position and its responsibilities. You're going to consider, for example, if you were to meet a friend in an elevator, how would you describe that position in a brief amount of time? That's what that summary is. And then you'll be looking at essential duties. You'll have a function and a duty regarding essential duties. And a function is a group of duties that constitute one of the distinct and major activities involved in the work performed. So for example, a library director works with the board of trustees to ensure the proper stewardship and financial management of the library. That would be an example of a function. A duty then is a distinct activity that's a logical or essential step in the performance of the function. For instance, it might detail what work is done, what action, how the work is done, and that might be procedures, materials, tools, or equipment, and why the work is done. So following that previous function, which was the library director works with the board to oversee stewardship and financial management of the library, a duty might be a library director prepares an annual budget and presents it to the board of trustees. So some considerations then: realize that essential duties are not a running list of job tasks. Individuals should consider what takes at least 10% of their time on an annual basis. So as I heard one presenter who was talking about job duties say, this is not where you put turn on the lights. So individuals should consider what is normally expected of their role, not including one-time or short-term circumstances and assignments. If you realize that more than 5 essential job duties are identified, you might consider if some of those duties can be combined or consolidated. So, for example, if you have repairing equipment and inspecting equipment as 2 separate items, you could combine those into one essential duty, which might be equipment maintenance. Essential functions should also be listed in a logical order. You normally would start with what do you do most of the time, and then go in descending order based upon the amount of time that's typically allotted to those duties. So for example, instead of writing enters the following information into XYZ database, record number, book name, author, instead you would just write enters required data into XYZ database and audits the entries for completeness and accuracy. Your qualifications should only consider what is, did you lose my slide? There we go. Okay, my computer blacked out just for a moment. Qualifications should only consider what is required or the minimum level of education or experience necessary to successfully perform the job. So what is required and needed might be different than the experience or qualifications that the individual currently serving in that role has. And that's an important thing to think about if you're planning to maybe start a new position, or you have an opening at your library and your previous person serving in that position had a certain amount of experience or education. Maybe you want to revise that. This would be an ideal time to do that. Most positions will often require minimum qualification levels of education, experience, and credentials, but some positions may allow for education and years of experience to substitute for one another. And you'll see this in some of the job postings that are on the state library's job list. So for example, a position might require a bachelor's degree, but they will also allow for an associate's degree and 2 years of relevant experience. They might accept that as a substitute. You'll also note on the slide here the 4 sections of the Job Analysis Questionnaire: the general information, the duties and responsibility, the work requirements, and then the work environment and physical demands. And you might go, physical demands? What kind of physical demand does a librarian have? They just look at books all day long, right? Well, if you think about it, things such as sitting for long periods of time, for some people, that is a physical demand. Or perhaps in your library environment, it's standing for long periods of time. Library books are heavy, so
Mm-hmm.
being able to lift 25 to 50 pounds, or you put them on a book truck, you have to be able to push those things around, able to push 50 pounds. So there are a lot of physical demands that you'll want to think about that are required for your job position. Brent, I'll let you kind of chime in with some of this too. Just looking, this is a sample, some pages from the toolkit about the responsibilities and requirements. It's kind of a checklist, basically. And Brenda, do you have any insights into how this got developed, or since you were on the planning committee for this?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I will say that we worked quite a bit with Siegel Consultings and Paula originally wrote a book on compensation. It's about 20 years old now, but she's got a lot of really good information to say, do you need to do this? Do you not need to do this? Start to really look and go through what's what's required of the job. So, when you look at something like has the authority to approve payments of bills, monitors activities in the library for compliance with legal regulations. These are high level things to be working on, and as a director, we don't always think about all that's required and just the day-to-day management of the library. But these things then become useful when you start to look at the library director's position in comparison to other jobs within the city. Are they managing the funds? Are they responsible for legal regulations? As you start to compare yourself within the city or even other positions within the community, saying, we feel that we should be paying them the same, if not more, than some of these other positions. It gives you something to take and really look for in those comparisons, and some talking points then as well when you have some of those crucial conversations about compensation.
Brenda, I think this is such a great checklist, not only for the purposes it's designed to help develop with compensation fairness, but just as trustee training, because I think we've all been there. We've heard people say, "What does the librarian do?" Oh, they
Mhm.
check books in and out. And we all know, if you worked in a library, we know it's way more than that. And this is kind of a nice checklist to give to your trustees and say,
Mhm.
here's what a library director really does. It's a
Oh,
lot more than just
absolutely.
in and out. Just a note that I want to point out, on the right side, you see under education, required versus preferred. And when I have worked with library boards that are in a hiring process, I always remind them required means it's required. And anybody who applies for your job that doesn't have that degree that you specified, they're automatically out of the running. No matter how great you think they sounded on paper, if they didn't meet that requirement, they're out of the running. So do you want required or do you want preferred? Two different words there that you really need to consider when you're looking at your positions. Here's some other pages from the toolkit, the KSAs, that knowledge, skills, and abilities, and then a little bit from the technology proficiency. And I think that in this day and age, technology proficiency should be high on the list of the people that we hire in our libraries. And Brenda, do you want to talk more about how these pages might have been developed?
Yeah, and Marianne, one of the things that Marianne and I were talking about just before we came on is, sometimes you look through this technology proficiency and think, well, I can do the basic, but can I do the advanced? And that's not to say the director has to do absolutely everything, but if as a director you don't have that ability, then that's something to look for in other staff that you're hiring, or to say, oh, this might be a piece that we need to contract with someone with IT for. So the technology proficiency is fairly detailed. And in fact, we had a couple of members of the state library team who feel very passionately about technology and requirements, and so they worked through this and kind of developed it um, over a series of meetings. The knowledge, skills, and abilities, what I want to say about that is really thinking about, what do you know? That's your knowledge, but your skills are really something that's learned. If you're really excellent at Excel, you probably didn't start out great at Excel, but you learned that over time. And your abilities, what are those things that you're looking for that people are able to do some of that customer service? So in this template, you'll see that there's a open area where you can write out what you think the knowledge for this position is, but it also gives you some examples. And that's the way the toolkit is really laid out, that if you've got an open-ended area where you're filling in information, there's also some guided text alongside so you can see like, oh, is it defined or do we give some examples of it?
So once you've completed that JAQ, you're ready to go on to the next step and create a job description. The compensation toolkit includes a template, which you see here on the slide, for drafting job descriptions. This is such a useful document. I know that we district consultants are often asked, do you have a sample job description? And while an example is somewhat useful coming from another library, you have to realize that every job is slightly different depending on that library and on that community and that position. So this template enables you to create your own specific job description. It's really a benefit, I think, of using the toolkit. And if you develop your job description using this template, you will definitely meet the requirement for Standard 21 that Brenda mentioned earlier, which is the requirement that says you have to have job descriptions for all of your jobs. This allows you to update employee duties and expectations. And remember that your job description is such a vital document because you use it if you're hiring for your job posting. You use it to develop your interview questions, and then you'll use it again when you evaluate your employee. So that job description is really a vital document. You want to make sure it's done right. Adding on to the up-to-date job description duties, that's going to, as I said earlier, enable you to perform evaluations more logically and easily. And one of the components of a job evaluation can be having goals, employee goals established. And those should be SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time sensitive. So this is a page, again, from the toolkit, this particular slide coming from Siegel again. But thinking about your performance components, those are going to include job responsibilities, that is what gets done. And this is where an individual's job description should be used as reference. Competencies, how it gets done. So for example, accountability or demonstrating reliability. things like that, goals, why it gets done, an observable and measurable end result. So lots of good information here. I don't want to take too much time because I think we need to move along here to stay within our allotted time for this session. Step 2, identify similar positions. When you review similar or comparable positions, some might find it helpful to have individuals within similar and comparable positions also fill out a job analysis questionnaire for comparison. Most of us, I think, when we go to compare salaries or positions or hours, Brenda alluded to this document earlier. Most of us will look at our big book of stats, which is an annual compilation of Iowa Library's annual survey responses. And the state library collates this information every year and puts it on our website. So you can view all of the libraries of within the same size code, see the averages of director salaries, etc. Now, the warning against doing this, and Brenda mentioned it earlier, many of our libraries are really underpaying directors. So when you start to average some things, you'll think, whoa, that is really a low number, and we're actually paying a little more than that. Well, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily paying too much. It means that others are paying too low. So you have to be careful when you look at the numbers. You have to know what the numbers mean before you start to interpret them. And I would say that ideally you want to use more than just these statistics to compare salaries. Brenda, anything you want to
Yes,
add?
absolutely. No, that's there are different resources within the toolkit to look for other areas. This is one resource, um, but absolutely. And when I talked with Scott, I mean, that was one of the things that he really cautioned on.
Yeah,
Um,
and this is a great resource. And I love that we put these numbers together every year like this. It's a great resource, but it should definitely not be the only resource you're relying upon for your comparisons. So this slide, again coming from Siegel, provides an example of two comparable positions, that of a library director, and the other is of a local government department head of marketing. Totally different. So this example, though, would be presumably coming from employees within the same city. And within this example, there are a lot of similarities. So for example, the responsibility for management and oversight of a team or department. Um, one might oversee maybe one more person than the other does, but if it's not a huge difference, it's not enough to warrant any large pay difference, because you can see the pay difference on this example is $10,000. Both of the positions have financial responsibility regarding budget preparation and forecasting. Both have strategic planning duties, and both require a minimum education level of a bachelor's degree and 6 years of education. Now, the differences are interesting because the library director position requires State Library of Iowa endorsement, which is the equivalent of 2 semesters of classes that you take in order to become endorsed. And thereafter, you have to maintain 45 credit hours every 3 years. So it's quite a bit of educational requirement for the library directors. The reporting relationship between these two positions is different. The library director reports to a board of trustees, with the marketing person reporting to the city management. The other difference is that the library director oversees facilities. Big difference. That marketing person typically does not have any responsibilities for building maintenance and facilities management. So based on this initial information, these two roles are similar and appropriate for salary comparisons. However, with the marketing person getting $10,000 more annually than the library director, it seems like maybe this would be an opportunity for us to say, okay, we see the similarities, but we also see that the director has a lot more responsibility and is actually getting paid less. So this is when you can use this kind of information to begin thinking about those, as Brenda called them earlier, crucial conversations. So step 3, then you're going to collect compensation data. Now you saw a little bit of that on the past slide, but you'll want to collect multiple points of data from a variety of sources, more than just one, more than just from libraries. And all of this data that you can compare and gather is going to help build a strong consensus regarding what is considered competitive pay. This is an example listed, again, coming from Siegel. Now, if you were to have an example where let's say one was showing $55 as compensation and then another 15 and another one 15, that's going to imply that your first example of $55 is probably out of line. You want to try to get things that are very similar. Also realize that sometimes there are differences in the definition of full-time. Not all organizations consider 40 hours per week as full-time. Some, it's a little less. So you want to think about those kinds of differences when you're doing your comparisons, and you'll want to convert, if necessary, any of the data in order to show proper comparisons. Also realize that the location, if you're going outside your area, there might be a higher cost of labor in that other area, and the data might need to be adjusted to reflect the cost of labor in your location. Brenda, anything you want to add to this?
Um, I don't at the moment. Thank you.
And just remember, from Siegel, they're saying, remember that when reviewing compensation data, you ensure appropriate apples to apples data comparison. So that's what we're after. So your final step then is to facilitate compensation discussions. After you identify your comparable positions and collect compensation data, you will want to share your findings. And that discussion, if you're a trustee, maybe with a government official, somebody within an Office of Human Resources, if your city has that, or a member of City Council. If you're the library director, that conversation might be with your Board of Trustees. You will want to schedule a meeting or an opportunity for a face-to-face discussion rather than just starting this out by email. It's best to do this in person. I personally recommend then following up with email, so you do have that paper trail. So start out in person and then do the follow-up with, here's what we discussed, here's the document that I presented when we met at such and such time and location. Remember that you'll also want to provide context on the vital function that your library plays within your community. I dare say that in most of our towns, the library is the city department that is most often visited by the majority of people living in that town. So it's always helpful to share how the library contributes to your local government strategic plan or how it relates to economic development efforts within your community. And you want to make sure that you're providing information and statistics about the library. You can glean those from your annual survey responses. Those will help describe the scope of your library's role, such as how many patrons it serves, how many books or collections are available, how many programs you're running, how many youth services activities you're doing, how many early childhood literacy classes you're presenting. Those are also known as story times. So inviting the local government official for a tour of your library is also another great way that maybe you have that crucial conversation at your library and invite that person that you're talking with to your library so they can actually see the library. Also remember that you'll want to be aware of any federal, state, and local laws and regulations, particularly pertaining to hiring and wage compensation. So just a few example talking points. These are good ones. These actually come from Siegel. This would be an example. You could say, given my research on similar or comparable positions, the compensation provided to this position appears to be low. Or this position at libraries X and Y in the towns of X and Y, who are similar in terms of size, budget, and number of employees to us, pays X percentage more. Or this position is paid the same as another within our local government. However, this position includes additional responsibilities that should be recognized with additional compensation. I think those are great talking points.
Yeah,
Brent,
Mary Ann, one of the things that I thought about there too is just how important building relationships with the city is. so that you've got a back and forth. They know what you do. You're at the table for a lot of the discussions that happen. I was also thinking as you were going through some of the talking points on having those conversations, something that occurred to me is also um, one that a board could have to say, we're seeing turnover in this position, and here's the rate of that turnover as well. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's a good point.
yeah, and I don't know that we've got that in there, but definitely in Iowa, we're
Mm.
seeing that. So, back to our why. Why use the Public Library Compensation Toolkit? Our goal with this is really to help make the process easier, allow for improvements within job descriptions, which also aid in performance evaluations and job postings, should there be other openings at your library. And it helps the board to really understand the director's role. I don't think there's a board that can go through that JAQ and not have a sense of the importance of what the library director does. And it encourages that board to actively advocate for improved salaries for library employees. And that is one of the goals of this toolkit, is not to rest this on the library director. Our goal is really for those board of trustees to be doing a lot of this work and looking at this. It equips the directors and trustees to thoroughly research and intelligently explain the basis for any budget requests of staff salary increases. They should walk in there feeling very informed when they make a request to increase the budget. And increase your success in convincing funders and stakeholders to appropriately fund the library with adequate budgets to provide fair and equitable pay for library staff.
As we wrap up here, I do want to point out just a few additional elements of the toolkit. There is a 2-page glossary in the toolkit that contains lists of action verbs. You might think, well, I don't know how to write a job description. I wouldn't even know what to say if I went through that checklist. What do I do after that? These action words will help you develop what needs to be said. So instead of just saying, does this and does that, you can use words such as develop or demonstrates or analyzes or arranges. So lots of good suggestions there of words that might be utilized. There are also 4 different types of descriptions that can help you develop your job description. For instance, there's the types of communication interactions, types of supervisory responsibility, types of supervision received, and types of problem-solving responsibilities. So it kind of helps you think about, okay, yes, our director supervises, but to what extent does our director supervise? So it lists the types of supervisory responsibilities so that you know, oh, this is on the high end. And finally, the toolkit includes a multi-page listing of technology proficiencies, which we've referenced earlier. And these should be used to develop the knowledge, skills, and abilities section of your job descriptions. I just want to point out that every one of you has access to a state library district consultant. Your district consultant can help walk you through the compensation toolkit resource. Will even be willing to come to your library and make a presentation about it to your library boards. So you can find your consultant's name and contact information on the state library's website. And speaking of library boards, Brenda, we've got another webinar coming up.
We do. So I believe Becky and Bonnie are presenting the boardroom series on Thursday, August 22nd. I think this is one that you should mark their calendars, send them reminders, have them register in Iowa Learns, maybe host a watch party with them at your library. But if not, strongly encourage them, if they can't make it to the library for a watch party, that they're logging in from wherever they are. It will be an hour-long session on the toolkit for boards from 6 to 7 on Thursday, August 22nd.
And since we're talking about boards here, I know that I always encourage my library boards in my district to take 10 minutes at every library board meeting for board education. And directors oftentimes will provide that board education during that 10 minutes at each board meeting. Take the next 10 minutes at your board education slot of your next board meeting and talk about the toolkit and promote the webinar that's coming up, either live if it's within that time frame or as the recording if your next meeting is after the fact. But make sure that your board is aware of this toolkit and that they turn to it and they access the recording and that they access the resource itself. Amanda, that's all we had. I think we finished a little early, so we have some time for questions and answers. What happened in the chat while we were doing this?
We had a couple people chime in. Katie was just wondering, are slides going to be available, or is it just more via access on our website for those?
We can make the slides available with the recording. Yes.
We'll get that. I'll make a note of that. And just a couple, Peg chimed in and just said they just used this form at their board meeting on Monday and it was super easy. So that's great to hear. Brenda chimed in and said
That's
yes.
wonderful to hear that. Peg, what library are you from? Just curious. We're going to use you as the poster child.
Mapleton.
Mapleton. That's
I think
fantastic.
yeah.
Good. Nice.
Yeah, and there's a couple like Wendy saying like the numbers don't factor if an employee was hired at a lower end of the pay scale and is working their way up by increments every year. So just a couple of things like that. Let's see. Bethany had a question about what would you suggest if you're bring up comparisons, but your board is unwilling to even consider what fair pay is, and they're constantly going back to the excuse of we're a small town, we're poor, we can't possibly pay that, like how to address that.
I actually saw that one come in and it got me thinking, right? And one of the suggestions that I would say there is to reach out to your district consultant and schedule a training session on it, because even looking at job descriptions and the high level of work that is required, even running a smaller rural library, you're running a city department. So I think maybe bringing in a consultant to do some training with them might help them also see this as a valuable thing. Uh, you may not have turnover in your library, but we do know that a lot of some of these smaller underfunded libraries are seeing that turnover. And that's opening up the eyes of some of the library boards as well, especially when that turnover is attributed to low rate of pay. I will say we were also, we started this as a 5-year plan goal. In early 2023 is when we were writing this. Libraries had a different financial outlook at that point in time. We still had the levies. It has become more difficult now, we know, with the budgets, but we do feel that this information is still really important to look at for libraries to really help address some of that turnover, satisfaction of working in a library, things like that. So we understand that budgets are really tight and that some of these are local decisions, but we also know just the crucial work that librarians do and that library directors do. So we hope by having this toolkit, it makes it there's 22 pages in that JAQ, and I don't say that to startle you. I say it because it's very thorough in trying to understand what that library director does.
Brenda, we talked earlier about using one of the checklists that we had on a slide to help your board understand what it is a library director does. But going through this process, I think not only helps your library board understand what the library helps your library board understand what the library director does, but it can help your city understand what the library director does, because oftentimes the admin of your city council members, they are very unaware the extent to which a library director has these really high level duties. So even if the money's tight right now, you can at least express what you learn from going through this process to your city so that they can have this on their radar. Okay, we need to think about how can we in the future years handle our budget in ways that we can adequately compensate, because our library director is doing incredible things and has tremendous responsibilities that we honestly weren't aware of because we were like everybody else and thought they only checked books in and out. So I think there's a lot of useful information here that can be applied in a variety of ways.
Sarah Young, also from Anita Public Library. I think you just kind of touched base on this too, Marianne, but she just was talking about asking the city councils decreasing our budget heavily. How is that? How do we get them to help us as well? But I think you kind of touched on that. I just didn't want to leave her out there. But yeah, that was about all we had for questions. Oh, and Bethany, yeah, Bethany, I see, fifth director in 10 years. Yeah, let's.
I think of the cost of turnover too, as you say, you're the fifth director in 10 years, how difficult it actually is then when there's this constant turnover to create, these really vibrant programs that have, that are sustainable over time, and to say, oh, I learned from that. Here's what I'm going to do better next time. And just the impact that a librarian has on the community when they're embedded into it and a known resource. And so it's really unfortunate. I'm sorry that you're the fifth director in 10 years. I hope it's uh, I hope they compensate you. I hope you're able to use this toolkit. um, Good luck, and reach out to a district consultant.
All right, well, any other last minute questions, comments, concerns? We do hope you'll all take a look at the toolkit for yourself, not rely on us to explain it, but print it out, explore it yourself. It is very easy to find on our website, very easy to access, and lots of accompanying information to go with it. So we've tried to make it kind of a self-help toolkit, but as we've said multiple times, reach out to your district consultant because we are there to assist you as necessary with this and any other library-related questions or concerns that you have.
Everyone, we want to thank you all for coming. We will get you checked off in Iowa Learns, and you'll have the evaluation available the next couple of days. So if everyone's good, I'm just going to end the meeting. And thanks again. That was great. Great information. Lots of, yes, city HR director here. Incredible. So good. It's great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.